Freedom. Freedom. Perhaps it's becoming clearer now as we've gone through this series how we desire freedom, but how we must look very carefully into the question of what does freedom really mean for me? We have a topic for today, this is number 8 in the series, where we remind ourselves that we are in the age of the emerging global person. Emerging. And how do we cope with this challenge? By self-discovery. Okay. Now, I could say that this is the most challenging of all the reflections we've had so far, but the reason is that we have touched on some aspect of this particular topic, the emerging global person, in every single one of the reflections we've had in this series. And so it might be a good thing if you go back and look at some of them again, either before you finish this or as you make your reflection on this. And I know that some people who watch these series make their own notes and even type their notes to other people and share them. And so today, again, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to keep my notes in view, at least in my view, while I do this. If you have a pen and paper there, it might be useful to jot down an odd word as it strikes you as we go through this. But first of all, remember it is wise to review the previous themes in this series, because somehow they're all interconnected in this challenge. And it's through them that we're going to find the next step to the self, the challenge. Okay, so let's start with this one. Have you had an experience like this ever in your life? Anne was busy working at her computer. Her 2 small grandsons, both under the age of 6, were busily playing around in the same room. Anne was getting frustrated with something she could not get right in her computer and looked down at her 6-year-old grandson and said, "Do you know how to make this thing work?" Whereupon Ian got up, came to his grandmother's computer, hardly reaching the height of the table, went boom, 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 and went back again, and it worked. And she said, in total bewilderment, "How did you know how to do that?" And he looked at her again, that surprised she should ask such a question. She said, "You just know." So Grandmother Anne said to me, "I swear they are all born with microchips in their brains these days." Well, I don't think so. But when you look at young children, either in your work or in your family, your children, grandchildren, are they really different? Are they physically different to you when you were a child or your parents when they were children? Are they psychologically different? Are they very, very different in the way they socially interact with each other? And am I also part of a new emerging creation of human beings? Is humanity being recreated in this age? Big questions. Take time and look deeply into them because they affect you. You and all your way of living with other people. Are we radically changing as human beings? Are we changing physically? But we've touched on this a little. We've talked about or mentioned the new capacity for genetic modification, recognizing genes you don't want and ability to cut them out and so on. And we've started to ask ourselves some serious questions as to where that research could be leading us to as human beings. Could we really get to a stage fairly soon where we could so modify our genetic inheritance that we could cut out various things from our genome and change ourselves physically? We also mentioned, of course, the possibility of a sex change using hormones. There's another aspect of this that is quite strange. It comes from sport. We prided ourselves on having special Olympic Games for the handicapped, the disadvantaged physically. Disadvantaged physically? A big shock at a recent Olympic Games when the runners who were disadvantaged because they did not have the full use of their limbs and were using artificial limbs clocked better times than the gold medalist who had both their normal or natural human limbs. Somebody's a disadvantage to have an artificial limb. Okay. But it happened. We may smile at it, but like the question of modification, where could this possibly be leading us? Transplant. Can every single organ now of the human body be changed? Can you receive, yes, you can receive somebody else's heart, somebody else's liver, somebody else's brain? Would there be any limits to the number of organ changes a person could have? Many questions. Are we changing physically? And do the children of those who have had organ transplants develop physical conditions, capacities differently? How much more research we have to do of the aftermath of some of our successes in medical research. Another one from sport, recent one for us. Blood doping. Whoever thought they would want to dope their blood? What could the results of that be? Blood, our system, being changed at will. So, are we changing physically? Is it possible to see changes that are coming about physically in human beings that could have long-term effects? Positive, negative? Skin colour. Oh, we know a great deal more about skin colour now than we used to. So, dozens and dozens of different mutations and permutations of the colour of the human skin. We never guessed. Now, that's only the physical changes. What about some of the psychological changes? What is the experience of space and time doing to us? We've just landed on the other side of the moon. We've landed on the other side of the moon. Wasn't it a robot that landed on the other side of the moon and walked around there? Bonding with your robot. was an article that was giving us advice not how to respond to the technology of the robot, but to make a personal relationship with our robot. Landing on the other side of the moon, except that it was the robot and not me. Okay. But even on this planet Earth, are my capacities, my intellectual capacities, changing? What does this come about from? We've lived off planet Earth. Some people have lived off planet Earth for long enough to begin to feel the effects of living in a different realm of space-time. Time? If we were living on in the International Space Station, we wouldn't know time the way we do on Earth. Because time, after all, is only what we call sunrise and sunset, sunrise and sunset. And that only happens because you're whirling around the sun. Now, if you're up there and you're not whirling around the sun from one of the planets, there is no time, because there are no sunrises and sunsets. One of our scientists rather jokingly remarked some years ago, if you were a twin, and your twin stayed on Earth, and you took a jet plane which travelled in the opposite direction to the sunrise for 2 years, when you arrived home, would you be older or younger than your twin left on Earth? You work out the answer. Speed. Can you remember what an astronomical unit is? I'm sure your 4 or 5-year-old soon will be able to tell you with sheer horror that you can't remember. No? It's part of their everyday language, their everyday experience. They live in cosmic dimensions. Do we? Yet. Speed. Well, if you can't remember anything about the astronomic units, a simple example was one. Could you imagine travelling from New York to Tokyo in less than 2 minutes? We've got some idea of the speed in which some of our missiles take off from here. No time. What is space? Aging, the aging process. Well, we know what it's like on Earth. Does it exist in space? Will the body react to timeless conditions? So much. It's interesting, isn't it? The thrills and the fears of human diversity. Is it really changing us? Are we changing? Physically, emotionally, intellectually? Are we becoming a new creation? We've been talking about sexual relationships and the developing role, equality in the role of male and female. That means social role. There are certain advantages and disadvantages in the humanity being partly male and partly female in physical structure. Much more exciting differences in emotional structure. Anything more than that? And therefore will our relationships get shorter and shorter? I mean, it has been almost accepted now that somebody can say, well, I've been in several long-term relationships. And some of them even lasted 2 years. Purpose of the vows of marriage? Not only is there a question of can I bond with my robot? Even I was surprised to see one of the news items the other day, a question has arisen of, can you kill your robot? Would it be legally allowed? Something is changing. Something about the understanding of being a person, of being unique, of having been created this way. You can perhaps hear the questions bouncing off the wall in the room you're in. So that's why you may need to capture a few of them on paper before they disappear. Becoming aware. Becoming aware of myself. Yes, we've mentioned this. That I'm not just this body, psyche, physical, transitory physical creation. And everything around me in the universe is a physical creation. It comes into existence and it disappears. Including this mighty galaxy that only has a number, where we have just photographed the biggest black hole we can think of. Put a human being against that and ask, are we emerging as different persons, people, humanity, a different creation, or not? How am I going to really look at this? Face the challenge of it? Well, the self is spirit, the source is spirit, and it is a mystery to our minds. So, we cannot relate with our minds, or our emotions, or our bodies. We have the capacity of being mystics. There's one simple answer to all the questions that I've thrown out now, and you may go on discovering in your interaction with other people. We have to realize we are mystics, and that is the way to freedom, to become truly ourselves, pure reflections of the pure source, the great mystery, the one who alone is. And we were warned about 50 more years ago by one of our theologians, in the future, come on, we've either got to be mystics or we are not going to be. We won't be new human beings, we will be finally who we really are. A reflection of the source, the one who alone is, the Spirit, God by so many different names. We haven't to know about, we have to experience the mystery and the self. When? Now. Now. Human life is a journey, a voyage of discovery of the self, of who we are. And that is freedom. When we are totally and finally free of the limits of the ego self and surrendered back into the one who alone is. Now, from the ego and the physical and the limited to the self, finally free of the misunderstandings, the ownership questions, the fears, all the other topics we have touched on in this series. Finally, free to be the self. Why we were created at all. We don't need to become a new creation, physically, psychologically. We just have to realize who we are and become finally free to be self. Spirit, reflection of the one who alone is. So, what to do now? Find your next step and then take it.